Okay, I'm excited to teach this biology lecture because it's on two of the groups which I have done research on, although I did not do the research on echolocation. So that is cetaceans and chiropterans, are dolphins and whales, and our bats. All right, we'll get into it. So echolocation is the process of producing sounds and then receiving those sounds to understand spatial information about what it bounces off of. There are two groups that do this: dolphins, so odontocetes, which produce their sounds in the nasal passages and are underwater. And water is actually a great medium for sound travel, so they do not have to spend as much energy as bats do, because sound in the air attenuates much faster or loses its strength in its signal. And so bats can only use echolocation very effectively in very short distances, whereas dolphins in the water can use it for much longer distances, and they don't have to make as many sounds. There do appear to be some other mammals which echolocate, including shrews, rodents, and tenrecs. And we may discuss in class that maybe humans can echolocate. But its uses are varied, including for prey detection, obstacle avoidance, orientation at night, or in dark. So the underwater environment and the nocturnal environment are both dark, light, deprived areas, and so it makes sense that this would evolve in those type of environments. We're going to start by talking by bat echolocation. Now, this is a bat's face. I believe it's a Mormops bat, and it has a lot of structures which are quite strange. You can barely even see its eyes, but here's an eye here, and here's an eye here. Its nose and structures around the nose are quite modified, as are its ears, and we'll talk about why that is later. Bats, well, we'll talk a little bit about sound, how it's produced, and the physics behind it. First off, you have a frequency, or how many times a sound wave is produced in a unit of time. Most frequencies, and this also is what determines the pitch, so how high or how low, most of the echolocation noises made by both bats and dolphins are above 20 kilohertz. However, some of them are made within the range of human hearing. I should say, actually, dolphins, most of them are in the range of human hearing. And the frequencies also have different ranges of frequencies that they're used, or bandwidth. Some span more than 10 kilohertz. So you can see on this graph, these do not span, especially this long section here. It's all a constant frequency over time. Whereas these over here, their frequency changes from just under 100 to under 50. So if it's less than 10 kilohertz change, that's called a broadband frequency modulated call. And they can detect position, and they can kind of say something is out there, but they lack, the target where it's going. The constant frequency modulated calls are ones that are less than 10 kilohertz. So actually these would be the constant frequency, and these would be the broadband frequency. And they can detect target, but they lack position. Sound is also measured in intensity, which is measured in decibels. So that's how loud the sound is. High frequency sounds in air, they attenuate, so they don't last very long, but they have a shorter wavelength. So a wavelength is measured from crest to crest, or from trough to trough. Here we have two signals. This one has a wavelength A, has a much shorter wavelength than wavelength B. Wavelength generally matches the prey size. So you want your call to bounce off the prey. If it's too long, then it may skip over the prey, so you want it to be within that range. Most wavelengths that bats use match the size of their prey. High frequency calls also allow for more directional hearing, so understanding where things are coming from and where they're going. Now, when producing a sound, and this is not only for echolocation but for all organisms which are producing the sound is coming out of your skull, out of your mouth or your nose. And so as it does that, it's going to bounce off the bones in your skull, including the bones of your ear. And so if you produce too much sound, then you can't hear it. This becomes an especially big problem if you're trying to echolocate. So because the production of the sound is so that you can hear it. So you don't want to produce a sound that is so loud that you can't detect it, can't detect its echo. So there are a few mechanisms within the inner ear of bats which allow it to dampen the sound after it's produced. There are two very small muscles, the tensor tympani and the stapedius, and what they do is they actually contract, and when a sound is produced, to reduce the amount of vibration of the tympanic membrane or eardrum, as well as reduce the angle of the stapes so that less sound is transmitted. There are also other self-deafening techniques as well. The brain and the nerves themselves attenuate and sort sound as it's being produced, and recognize that sound is one being made and not one that they want to hear. The nose structures also, and the blood and fat around the ear cavity can help to isolate the ear so that the bones within the skull don't cause a self-deafening problem. And I mentioned before, sounds can be produced out the mouth or out the nose. In bats, you have nasal emitters. So these are ones that do actually produce the sound but leave their mouth closed, and it actually comes out of their nostrils. So these are generally frugivores, so they aren't hunting aerial prey. They're really just looking for prey that don't move or that don't fly, that lay. Well, not that they don't move. Fruits don't move, but you may also have insects which are along the leaf litter or on the ground. They aren't flying around at a fast rate, so they don't need the same acuity that a oral emitter may need. And an oral emitter is going to open its mouth. They are going to focus on insectivorous flying prey, and their skull structures are also different. So this is a frugivore, which has a nasal emitter, and it also has a nose leaf, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then this is an insectivorous bat here, and you can see the angles are different. Some of the structures are different, including where the orbit lies. Oral emitters are more reliant on locating and tracking prey through the air, so they're going to have differences there as well. Now, there's two approaches in using echolocation to find, detect, and capture prey. Bats that use a low-duty cycle produce sound 20% of the time. So that means 20% within, say 0.2 seconds out of 1 second, they are producing the sound. The other 8/10 of a second, they are listening. Okay, and so they're allowing the sound to be heard before they produce another sound. But as they get closer, they then will increase the frequency of their sounds and hone in on their prey. And this creates what's called a feeding buzz. You can see that here. This is a click here, this is a click here, and then as they get closer, it makes a bunch of clicks immediately after each other so that they can hone in and capture that prey. High duty cycle emitters produce sound greater than 20% of the time, and what they do actually is focus on the Doppler effect. So focus on how the echo is occurring over time, and that actually gives it position information. The Doppler effect also accounts for why a train makes that noise after it goes by, the noise, because that's the noise is different because the object is in motion, and the sound all bunches together because you're receiving sounds that are coming towards you and away from you at the same time. All right, but they are able to then produce sounds and listen to sounds at the same time. So it's they don't have to wait to hear before they can produce another one. Okay. I talked about the nose leaf. So here's a nose leaf right here, and a frugivorous bat eats fruits. The nose leaf is going to be found on nasal emitters, and what happens is the sound is produced out its nostrils, and the nose leaf helps to attenuate or directionalize the sound. You have here a mustached bat. It has lips which curve around, and you can see this is actually creating a megaphone effect, so it can amplify the sound. Ears are also structured differently. So this inner ear here is called the tragus. That helps to allow sound in and prevent accessory sounds. They can also move their ears in different ways. In fact, sometimes they can position their ears so one is slightly receiving the sound echo at a slightly different sound time than the other ones. So they're positioned slightly off, and that allows them to use more of a location and hone in on their prey. But all of these, although it makes these bats look pretty ugly, they're all involved in distorting or making the sound more accessible and provide more information for them. So a big question for echolocation is, how did this evolve and why did this evolve? And there are a few different theories with bats. The first is that echolocation evolved first and then flight second. If you're flying around, you're capturing aerial prey, echolocation is a great method to do that. So the thought really is, well, which evolved first, echolocation or flight? The thought is, if echolocation was first, that it was first for orientation and communication. We see that with some shrews. They are using it to communicate or find their way around nocturnal or dark areas. The second theory, however, is that the flight and the need to capture prey was first. The flight was first, and then echolocation evolved later because of their aerial characteristics. The last one is that they evolved together. Now, there's evidence kind of supporting each, but the biggest evidence which kind of points one way or the other is this transitionary fossil of a bat called Onycteris, and it is a very primitive bat which showed skeletal formations that they believe it flew. It had flying, but when you look at its skull morphology, it did not have the necessary structures for echolocation. So that means that flight first is actually the theory right now which has the most support. So we'll see if that changes with more fossils and more evidence. So echolocation has many uses, including communicating between individuals. When it has been recorded that when some species of bat are in the same area, they will change their calls, possibly to identify themselves. There's also calls which are emitted when in the same space to kind of say, hey, let's not run into each other, or I'm here, so move over. Much like cars do in traffic with the little honking of the horn, right? They may also be important for communicating, where am I going? I'm going to a maternal colony or other roosting sites between the species. Orientation is, of course, very important for it. Where is it in the space in which it is, whether it's in a cave or out in a field or a forest or whatever. And of course, prey detection is very important for bat echolocation. All right, a lot of that stuff for bat echolocation applies to cetaceans as well. And it's not all cetaceans. In fact, there is no evidence that baleen whales use echolocation. It seems that only toothed whales or odontocetes use echolocations. Dolphins also seem to be able to, and I'll just refer to them as dolphins now, but dolphins may also seem to be able to use ambient sound to see. So even without producing a click, they can just hear their surroundings, and that can give them the spatial information that they need to navigate through an area, which is an amazing ability if you think about it. So some of the structures that the dolphins use, so they aren't producing sounds with their larynx like you and I do when we're talking. Instead, they produce sounds through what's called these phonic lips, or sometimes called monkey lips, and they produce these clicks. And it's really much like how your lips would vibrate in a trumpet or when you're making those sounds. So that vibration is actually what's making the noise. And this is found in the blowhole, and it allows them to actually make two different sounds at the same time. Bounces off the back of the skull, and then that goes through this fluid-filled or fat-filled, lipid-filled organ called the melon. The melon can change shape and can direct then the sounds towards an object, and it specializes or creates this beam of sound. And this also allows for two sounds to occur at the same time that are different, so you can have multiple echolocation calls going out at the same time through one sound production. Here's a phonic lip of a sperm whale. You can see they can be quite big, but generally are a few inches. The jaw then picks up incoming sounds and transmits them to the middle ear. The middle ear can also directly receive sound, but if you are directionally towards something, the jaw is going to be first able to pick that up at the primary reception center there. But the ears can as well. So an interesting method of echolocation occurs in the sperm whale. It doesn't have a melon, it has two different fluid-filled, lipid-filled areas in the front of its head, and that's why it's so big and funny shaped. The first one is called the spermaceti organ, and what happens is it produces its blowhole is actually up here, so not way back here, but up here, and it produces its sounds with the phonic lips. It goes backwards through the spermaceti organ, off the frontal air sac, which then sends it through the junk, and the junk actually focuses the sound and creates this beam of sound which it uses to find its prey. Okay, it actually is able to make the loudest biological sound of any living organism, which is 235 decibels. So that's really loud. It's much louder than you or I could withstand without nerve damage. It's been calculated that they could possibly detect prey up to 750 meters away. That was one study. Another study said maybe up to 16 kilometers away. So it's really a large range for finding its prey. It's what it's mostly thought to be used for. And it eats giant squid, which are in the deep ocean. It's very dark. Can't really see much there. So this is going to be a great tool to use in that environment. As it approaches the prey, so it's going to vary its calls just like the bat does. As it approaches it, it's going to create a high frequency sound, which is going to create like this feeding buzz, and it will hone in on capture its prey. All right, so again, the ears of cetaceans, they do have ears, and They are on both sides of their head and acts as a hydrophone, which then allows the location, not only locate where sounds are coming from, but how they move. We are able to do this as well because our ears are on opposite sides of our head, so we can, if something's on the left side, it's going to be louder than the right side. We don't think about it, it just occurs in our brain when we hear things that we know from what direction things are coming from. And also we can detect as it's moving across from one area to another. And usually when we hear a loud sound, and it's coming towards us, we can detect that and we'll duck or cover our head or something, right? Just like the bats, the bullae, or the bony structure which holds the chamber, the resonating chamber for sound, they are insulated from the rest of the skull. This is for self-deafening purposes, as well as it allows for better hearing in water. So in the air, the sound is going from, it's changing mediums, right? So it's going from the air and then to your membrane and then off the bones and then into our cochlea, which is filled with fluid. Okay, so it has to have some sort of transition to do that. But the cetaceans are already in water, so they don't have to do this transition from air to fluid, but their ears evolved in air, so there's this fluid encasement around their ear to allow for better transmission of sound into the nerve, which then goes up into their brain. Okay, that's all for echolocation, bats and whales.